We'd like to introduce Sarah Vogel. She is a horticulture and natural resource educator for DeWitt, Macon, Piatt counties. She specializes in annuals and perennials, greenhouse production, landscaping, and urban forest management. She received a bachelor's degree from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale in forestry with a concentration in recreational management, and a master's degree from University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign in crop sciences with a concentration in horticulture. Sarah's passion is connecting with underserved populations of the community and fostering an appreciation for nature through education. Thank you, Sarah, for joining us tonight.
As Chris said, I'm Sarah Vogel. Thank you so much for having me. I'm here to talk with you this evening about how and when to prune the evergreen species that you may have. I'll go ahead and apologize for the corny title and let that apology cover all of the rest of the nutty jokes I might have. Okay, so just starting with the basics, we often hear the terms evergreen and conifer used interchangeably, and in fact, they are not interchangeable. They don't mean the same thing. Evergreen means just that it's green all the time. So without getting too far into taxonomy and plant classification, conifer generally refers to cone-bearing plants. For our purposes tonight, we'll be discussing evergreens, whether they are coniferous or not. And you can see here I've got examples of southern magnolia, which will grow in some parts of Illinois. And it's an evergreen species that is not a conifer, as well as this lovely newly sprouting bald cypress, which is a conifer, but it's one of our deciduous species. There are only 8 conifers native to Illinois, and as mentioned, some of those, actually 2 of those, are deciduous, meaning that they lose their leaves in autumn. And it depends on where you are in Illinois. Some of these may not be native to your county. So this list of 6 conifers and 1 flowering evergreen are pretty much it for native species of evergreens in Illinois. You can see that I've got not recommended next to red pine. It's kind of fallen out of favor in the landscape due to its susceptibility to pests and pathogens. So does this mean these are the only evergreen species that you can plant? Certainly not. There are lots of non-native species that can tolerate Illinois climate and conditions. And the important thing is that you aren't planting anything invasive that would outcompete natural species or native species, that you don't plant anything super aggressive that you're constantly having to battle it in your yard, or so finicky that you have to baby it, and that you do your research on a non-native species before planting. And if all else fails, reach out to Extension. We can point you in the right direction. If it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn on my video because I'm a terrific hand talker. I don't know, is that all right? Okay. So these are some of the non-native but still very popular species in many parts of Illinois. If you have one of these species and it's not doing well, it may be because it doesn't like Illinois climate or maybe is not suited to the site that you're in. I kind of grouped them together here into our firs and spruces and our true pines and so on. I see white fir pretty commonly. Korean fir less so. They're more of a novelty, but they're still very pretty, and I do see them. Spruce trees, they do well if they are planted in the correct site and given proper care. Pines can be wonderful trees in the landscape. However, you can see that I have with Austrian and Scots pine, also called Scotch pine. They're not really recommended any longer, again, due to their susceptibility to pests and pathogens. We have arborvitae, which are also called northern white cedar, which are very popular. They come in a lot of different hybrids and cultivars and different forms. We have hemlock or Suda canadensis, which is a wonderful species in the Illinois landscape, as is Douglas fir. You can see by the name that Douglas fir is actually not a true fir nor a hemlock, but is more closely related to hemlock. So that's why it's given the name pseudo-suga or false hemlock. Yew is a very commonly used kind of shrubby evergreen. Some might say overused. And it's often made to look very formal with straight lines. Then we have cypress, or false, also called false cypress, which has a lot of different cultivars and forms, trees, shrub forms, and can be useful for a lot of landscaping purposes. Umbrella pine, or Japanese umbrella pine, is not a true pine, but a Cyadopodes. They're native to Asia, and they can do well if planted in the right site, though they would probably be marginal in northern Illinois. And then finally, boxwoods, which are not coniferous, but they're still used in many landscape applications. And it's important with boxwoods, as with any species, that you choose a disease-resistant variety, because things like boxwood blight and other pests and pathogens are still very common. And then for anything, beyond this list, your specialty or novelty evergreen species, again, I suggest you get species-specific info for that plant before it goes in the ground, and that you follow those recommendations. So just some uses for evergreens. We often see a row of evergreens planted surrounding a rural property, maybe to serve as a windbreak and help that household conserve energy by cutting down on the heating bill. Evergreens are often used for screening between one landscape and another. Maybe you don't want to look at your neighbor, or maybe they don't want to look at you. They're also very useful for providing sort of a background for our more colorful annuals and perennials. And often in the winter, evergreen species are some of the only color we really have in the landscape. So if you are looking at choosing evergreen species to plant in your own yard, or you're a master gardener, master naturalist that are making suggestions for others, remember our mantra, right? Putting the right plant in the right site. Because when we push the limits of plant tolerance, it may not immediately kill them. You may wind up with a large and possibly expensive tree removal due to the years and years of stress. So proper site selection, proper planting and establishment methods, and fertilization throughout the tree's life will ensure its health and longevity. So you want to take inventory of your site. We have hardiness zones in Illinois that range from 5A in the north all the way to 7A in the tip. So that's 5 different hardiness zones. So know where you are, know what your soils are like, what your drainage is like, how many hours of sunlight you get, because not all evergreens will do well with shade. Once you know your site, let that guide your choice of evergreen species, not the other way around. Don't choose a plant just because it's pretty, because if it's not suited to the site, it's not going to be pretty for long. So as mentioned, choosing a disease-resistant variety is important. There are a lot of different hybrids and cultivars that are bred specifically for that, for disease resistance. Again, be aware of that prior to planting, selecting a plant to go in that site. If you are planting or even have an evergreen already existing near a driveway or sidewalk or right-of-way, street that receives salt in the winter, that can be a problem. Not all evergreens are going to tolerate that. So if you're thinking of planting one, maybe you should consider an alternate site or an alternate species or an alternative to salt. And then finally, this photo is a pretty good example of taking into consideration the mature height and spread of a tree before you go to plant it. This is Picea pungens, or Colorado blue spruce. And now these homeowners are left with only one lane of driveway for their 2-car garage, which can be kind of a mess for anybody coming in, especially if you got a new car. You don't want to pull it past those scratchy pine spruce needles. As a side note about blue spruce, they are beautiful trees when they're healthy, but they are not a fantastic plant for Illinois. They will grow well for a while, but because they're acclimated to more cool, more dry climates, more sandy and well-drained soils of, say, Colorado, as the name would indicate, they rarely do well as mature trees in Illinois. They are beautiful and hard to resist, and they may even do well as young trees for a while, but I wouldn't recommend them for the Illinois landscape because they are ultimately going to suffer some type of problem, whether it's pest or cultural. So most evergreens grow in this pyramidal or excurrent shape as opposed to our decurrent or deliquescent trees. This excurrent shape is common in our pine, spruce, fir, Douglas fir, hemlock. These require very little pruning. They naturally grow in this shape that does not require it. They naturally grow in this pyramidal shape with low, broad branches that should be left intact. And so if they're trained while they're young, they're going to rarely need pruning beyond that, save for removing some dead wood. So why do we prune? Well, it could be for different reasons. One could be to remove double leaders in an excurrent shaped trees. You only want one to maintain that pyramidal shape, right? Or perhaps there's a dead limb that you don't want to fall on your house or your car. These are totally logical reasons to prune because they're going to maintain the health of the tree and the health of the surrounding people or property. And ultimately, we prune to control the growth of a species. Now, because this is about evergreens, many of you probably know you can prune to increase flowering and fruit production, but we're just talking about evergreens tonight. So we're trying to control the growth. Maybe it's control the density of the branching to keep that nice, dense, more compact form. So you have nice screening, so you have nice windbreak. Maybe your evergreen has become overgrown and you want to remedy that, which is a great example of why we should consider the ultimate height and spread of a species prior to planting. Maybe you want to train and shape younger trees like these white pines in a tree nursery so that they maintain a certain shape. Now, as these white pines grow, they're not going to always be that perfect and compact, but these are being trained pretty well to keep a more dense shape. Pruning also happens for a lot of reasons that I would say are illogical. We often see the removal of lower branches, but they should be left intact, okay? They do not regrow or resprout, and removing these lower and broader branches of a tree really compromises that structural integrity of a tree. It's not recommended to plant any plants underneath. Sometimes people are, I want to plant my hostas under there. Well, if you even get them to survive, because it's really difficult to grow something under an evergreen, if you succeed in that, now those plants are in competition with the tree for water and nutrients. So it's just not a good idea. We don't want to see the central or main leader removed. It will not resprout or regrow. You'll see another leader take over the central or apical dominance, and you're going to wind up with something like that. Okay, main leaders aren't always purposefully removed. Sometimes they're broken out by wind or wildlife or pathogens. I got a little ahead of myself there. Generally, another branch will assume apical dominance, or all three, three different ones will compete, like this photo illustrates. And it's a general rule of thumb never to prune more than a third of the crown of any tree or shrub, deciduous or evergreen. That's a good rule of thumb to just get into your head. Never more than a third. And then finally, don't leave stubs like this on any tree, evergreen or otherwise. And I'll show you a great graphic of exactly where to make cuts to remove larger branches if you must do that. So when are we going to prune? You can prune lightly right now to make the beautiful holiday swags that you're going to make. But pruning for any other reason should really be done at the right time of year. So it depends on what you're wanting to do, to what species, as to when you prune. You want to be aware of the tree's branching and budding pattern. Some have whorled branching, some have a more random branching pattern. These are common examples of each, though not necessarily all-inclusive lists, but just to get an idea. When you go to prune, you want to start with clean and sharp tools. Trust me on this one, you do not want a dull hand pruner to go to town because it's going to make a mess of the muscles in your arm as well as the tree. It is a good idea, especially with evergreens, to use gloves. I'm not a huge fan of using gloves when I do garden work, but with evergreen species I do because the sap can be really messy. And then if it's something, you know, a bigger limb or a bigger job, please know when to hire a professional for your own safety. So with any tree species, it's important to make a proper pruning cut. And when you're removing larger branches on an evergreen, you want to look for this branch collar, this kind of bulbous area that these arrows are pointing to. First, you want to make an undercut where A is located here, then cut the branch off at B, and then make this cut from C to D. And the reason we do this with larger branches is to keep the weight of that branch from ripping or peeling down the trunk and making a larger wound. And when you do make this cut from C to D, be sure not to get into this branch collar. Trees have hormones in that branch collar that ensure proper healing, so we really want to leave that intact. And when you prune it properly, it should look something like this. A nice clean cut with the bark isn't peeled down the side of the tree and this branch color is left intact. So we'll start with pines here because everybody calls everything a pine tree if it's evergreen. It's just a pine tree. It's a pine cone. Pines have whorled branching patterns, so that means the branches grow in a whorl or a circle around the main stem or the main leader each year. These photographs are of the candle stage of growth, and the photo on the right shows the shoot, is a really good illustration of the shoot that will be that central or main leader, and then the whorl of branches that are forming around it. You may also notice in this photo that there are no lateral or side buds on pines, that there are only terminal buds. So there's no buds on the sides of the branches, there's only the end or terminal buds. This means the ends of the branches where those buds are opening are the main growing points, the only points capable of new growth. So if you prune a branch beyond these buds, it will not form any new growth. And if it's okay, I do see the chat box with some questions in it. If it's okay, I'll save them all for the end, unless anybody has any reservations about that. Just so I don't run over on your time. Typically with a lot of evergreens, again, that more dense form is desirable to many homeowners. And to maintain this shape, you want to train the trees while they're young by cutting them at the candle stage. So you can get you can pinch them by hand. I would suggest using hand pruners to prune the candle back about halfway when it expands in late spring. Again, do not cut back into that woody stem because new growth will not develop, and shearing is most certainly not recommended on pines. So here we have some good pictures of somebody with their hand pruners. You may not notice, but this is actually a side branch here. That isn't even the main leader of the tree, because when you prune these candles to keep this compact, dense form, you have to do the whole tree. You start at the top and move your way down. So this is a good illustration. These candles are probably as tall as they might get for now. They're just starting to expand. They're cutting about halfway into it. You can tell this is going to be the leader. He's the tallest. And then you want to cut the leader and leave him a little bit taller than all the world candles. Okay, so cut each one about in half. Again, all the candles on the tree must be pruned to keep that dense form. And then here is a picture of the end of a branch, these terminal buds at the end of the growing season. This is what it looks like now. You've pruned it back. It is set bud to grow for the next year. Mugo pines and any other shrubby true pines can be treated about the same as pine trees. You want to do it prune in late spring to achieve that density. You want to cut all of the candles. On shrubs, however, you can prune a little more than half. You can prune up to about 2/3 of the candle to really keep that nice compact shape. Spruce fir and Douglas fir are entirely different species, but they can be, in regards to pruning, they can be kind of clumped together because they can be pruned very similarly. They have, again, whorled branching, but as opposed to pines, they have the presence of both terminal and lateral buds, side buds, where pines, of course, only have terminal. So you can prune back to any of these lateral buds to shorten the internode or the space between buds. And when you cut to a lateral bud, it should be visible. Don't just go hacking away to a point on the stem and hope that a bud will appear. Make sure you can see it. And then additionally, if the main central leader fails in these trees, it's relatively easy to train a new leader in these species, which I'll show a good picture of shortly. So when it comes to pruning, if you're just trying to maintain the shape of the tree, you want to do this in early spring and just prune the new growth. Or if in early summer and you can remove about 2/3 of that unbranched tip. If you are trying to reduce the size and really take it back a little bit more, you want to do that in late winter, like right before spring, and then always prune back to a lateral branch. Don't leave any stubs anywhere. You always prune back to a bud, back to a node, back to a branch, and that you can see. And then I'll show you great pictures of how to repair a broken leader. If that leader breaks out, you kind of cut him off, and then you can train a side branch and tie up that side shoot. You do want to remember to remove the tie after a year. So here's just a picture of some possible pruning cuts where you could make it. You could just kind of tip prune here, back to this point. You could take it a little further here, or if you wanted to take more off, you could do this top cut. If you really wanted to reduce the size, you could go way back in here and take more of that branch off, but just to show you some idea of where you can prune. So here is repairing the broken leader. This guy from 1964. It was just a great illustration of how to do this. So if the leader does break out, now this one isn't broken, but we're going to use this as an example. Let's pretend that it is. You can cut, I believe this picture will show, the next picture will show, he cuts this down a great deal and then ties up a side shoot. Because typical growth after these trees first establish and they're very young, they can be pretty leggy and the foliage can be very sparse. Some of these lower branches may grow kind of quickly and prohibit sunlight from reaching the upper and more inner branches. So it is nice to train them when they're young to have that nice pyramidal shape. So here we are at the get-go. You can see some of these lower branches are already getting pretty tall and it's getting kind of thin and sparse in here on the main leader. So I believe from the next picture, it looks to me like this gentleman cuts about right here. I think you all can see my cursor. I hope so. The branch that points to his fingers, I guess, if that would be helpful. So he cuts it off, uses a little stake that you can see we've tied with some twine, and takes just a little side shoot up like this. So this picture shows the main leader being cut and that branch tied up to train it as the new dominant leader. Again, if you're going to do it for the top, you've got to do it all the way down every branch. And that's how I would suggest starting from the top to the bottom. And so he's showing another good place where to do this to keep that nice pyramidal shape. Oh, good. You can see my cursor. I'm glad. Then when we come to yew, arborvitae, and hemlock, again, entirely different species, but they can be treated the same when it comes to pruning. These have, again, the random branching pattern as opposed to whorls. So we just have branches coming off the main stem wherever they want. We have the presence of lateral buds, and then we also have dormant buds further back on the stem, so they can be cut back a little bit harder. If we're cutting and pruning to maintain that shape, again, you want to prune in spring before the new growth. So you prune in spring, and then as the new growth expands, it kind of conceals those pruning cuts. Little trick of the trade there. I don't always promote shearing, but on the new growth of some of these species, they actually respond pretty well. If you are going to shear, it should be done after the new growth has expanded, so sometime in June. Okay. Again, you can prune further into the canopy of these trees as long as we're not removing more than a third. And then with especially arbs, you want to be careful of the dead zone of arborvitae and then juniper slash eastern red cedar that I'll show you pictures of. If you are shearing into a hedge, you always want to be careful to keep the base wider than the top. And I'll show you pictures of what that looks like as well. So here's what we're talking about, the dead zone. So if you have one of these kind of pyramidally shaped trees, whether it's an eastern red cedar slash juniper, or whether it's an arborvitae, you don't want to hack the top off to round it out, okay? Because you're going to get into this dead zone. Kind of the rule there is 20% removed. What happens is these plants produce this very thin, very dense layer of growth and a big, large interior dead zone. And if you prune back to that, it's going to be unsightly. It's going to take years to fill in. Where with, again, especially juniper and arborvitae, no new growth is going to form in that zone. So don't reduce the size of it too much like that or shear it back too much. So here is a picture of an example of yew growing above the window. If that were my yard, they wouldn't even be there. I think they're overused and kind of outdated, to be quite honest. There's a lot of nice things that you can use other than yew anymore. But you can see they've cut back to a growing point, either a bud or another smaller branch. Here's another little graphic of exactly where to make that cut back to those other lateral branches. And then here's the pruning completed with the debris in front. You will take a heavier pruning. Again, not more than a third, that rule of thumb, a third. I have most certainly seen, now this example here, they could probably have taken a lot more than that off, but they were careful and they only wanted to keep it right below the window, and that's fine. It's, a matter of taste often in our own yards. But I've certainly seen, 10-foot tall yew species taken down by half. And they did survive. They did okay. That doesn't mean it was the healthiest choice, but yews will actually take a beating and do okay. So here's the before and after of that pruning. Yews can also be pruned again in midsummer if needed, but you don't want to wait until fall to do it. We don't often prune in fall because we get new growth past that point. If we get kind of the late warm weather, we'll get new growth that then doesn't have a chance to harden off before winter and then can freeze and, cause shoot dieback and things like that. And that's just an open wound possible for infection and things. So we try not to prune things in fall unless otherwise recommended. Then when it comes to juniper, and again, when I say juniper, that applies to eastern red cedar, use those terms synonymously, and false cypress or chamaecyparis. These again have the random branching pattern, the lateral buds, and the presence of dormant buds. However, these especially require very, very little pruning. Both of these include several different species or varieties, that can vary really greatly. And there's trees, shrubs, different sizes and colors and forms. So you can get a lot of, even like a blue rug juniper, that's practically a ground cover. And then there's, 20-foot tall trees as well. So you can get a lot of different varieties out of these. So there's really no reason to prune these unless it's for safety. If you do choose to prune, shearing is not recommended because again, you get into that dead zone. You can tip prune in the summer, which can help to increase density slightly. But if you do that, please be light-handed in it. If you must reduce the size of the juniper red cedar, do so in early spring, like April. Again, not in late summer or fall. because here's, the dead zone again. We want to be careful with that. And that's what it looks like. Junipers have very unforgiving dead zone, where down here our taxus, our yew will be very forgiving. If we cut one of these back to look like this little one in front, it can be very forgiving. That's not coming back. That juniper is not coming back. So to cover our common non-coniferous evergreens, holly and boxwood, again, both of these require very, very little pruning. When it comes to holly, there are both evergreen and deciduous hollies. So to be clear, I am discussing the evergreen holly species native to Illinois, which is Ilex opaca. These do well to maintain a more natural shape than like a formal hedge, so shearing is definitely not recommended. If you're pruning to shape these or to keep mature plants at a more manageable size, this one can be done in late fall or early winter, which is perfect for the holiday decorations. Just remember that 1/3 rule and don't get carried away when you're making your swags later. Hollies need both a male and female plant. Male and female flowers are on different plants to produce the fruit, to produce flowers and the subsequent berries, and only the females produce fruit. Most varieties are named appropriately, like China Boy or China Girl. These are pictures of, this is the staminate or male flower, and the pistillate or female flower. There are also deciduous hollies. This is Ilex verticillata, also called winterberry, and is often used for its decorative value as well. Boxwoods, they can be kept as a formal or informal hedge. We a lot of times see the old boxwood meatballs, and though they do require very little pruning, you can keep them pretty vigorous for years with cutting some of the oldest branches back to the ground every once in a while. It's not necessary, but it can be helpful for air circulation. If you just want to shape them, that can be done in early spring. You don't want to do that in the fall. If you do that occasional thinning, you can improve the air circulation and improve your chances of avoiding pathogens that thrive on more shaded and more dense foliage. You don't want to shear more than once per year. And you want to try and alternate from year to year between thinning and shearing. And if you like the formal look, that's fine, but adhere to the principles of this little diagram here. You can see this is what I'm talking about. Wider at the top, that's not good. That's a no-no, because what happens is sunlight doesn't reach these lower branches, and then you get more and more sparse foliage, and it just dies out, and all you have is the top of a shrub. So this is what you're looking for here. The circles, I know what you're going for, but you want to make it more of a semicircle. So here's in a nursery that from afar, they do look very circular, spherical, I guess you could say, but they're actually sheared just right down to the ground. They don't come in at the bottom. And then to summarize all of the pruning there, when you go to prune some pieces from your yard to make this wonderful swag you're going to make with our lovely master gardeners, remember just to prune lightly and to cut to a lateral branch. And just one little note on Christmas trees, or a couple little notes here. If you do decide to put up a tree, remember first to measure the space that you have in your house, because nothing is more sad than bringing home a beautiful tree just to have to hack it back. When you're in the lot, make sure you inspect the tree for needles that are browning or falling off. When you're done with it, you can mulch it or chip it for use in your own garden. You can take it to a local composting facility. You can take the kids and grandkids and decorate it with seeds and suet and berries and put it in the yard for wildlife for a while. Or you can use it as a fish breeding structure if you have a private pond. Some public entities have programs set up where people can donate their spent Christmas trees, but please check before just going and chucking it in your local lake, because you will get fined. But regardless of how you reuse your tree, please try and find a use for it besides the landfill. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. I would very much appreciate if you could take the survey that we've made. It just takes a few moments and it really helps us to determine how we meet the needs of our audiences across the state. So thank you so much for your time. Oh, the QR code here also goes to the survey if you don't want to take the link there.
Sarah?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Okay, thank you. I had to call in. I don't know. I'm having whatever issues on my microphone. I do have a few questions.
Sure.
So as we're kind of going down, I wrote them down for you. One question was, some in my neighborhood in Northern Illinois have junipers. Any thoughts about whether they are a good choice? So thoughts if you think those are a good choice for Northern Illinois.
For Northern Illinois, you know, I would have to look and see which counties that they're perfect for. I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off here if I may. I'm going to have to think about that for a minute, but Eastern red cedar is, yeah, those are junipers are a native to Illinois species. So I would think that you would be okay, but I would hesitate to say without checking the map, first of all. Oh, I sure can put that survey link in the chat box.
Yes, and we will also be sending you a reminder. As of tomorrow, we'll send everything out and the survey again if you don't have a chance to do it this evening, as just a thank you and a reminder. Another question was, is it harmful to limb up an evergreen? Is it more likely to topple over during a strong wind?
Yes, it is harmful, and yes, it makes it harder. It makes it more susceptible to high winds. If it's not well established, it could uproot. It's, you know, lost again that structural integrity at the bottom by losing those broader branches. So limbing up your evergreens that have that pyramidal shape is not a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Another question was, can you prune pines like spruce?
No, you cannot. You can, if it's a larger limb, you can do it. You know, you're just taking it back to the stem itself. But otherwise, spruce have those lateral buds where pines do not. So spruce, you can kind of cut back on the branch a little bit, and another bud will, you know, come out from one of those lateral buds. But pines only have terminal buds.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
Another question we had come in was, what about pruning to remove branches of juniper or yews or cedar that have rust, the orange rust?
You know, that is something that I did not build into this presentation, but I am glad to, if somebody wants to take my email, they're more than welcome to send me that question, and I will get them a really good answer to address that.
Okay, and part of taking the survey, you can ask Sarah some questions on your survey if you have any individual questions. So one question was, what is limbing up?
Essentially, when you take the limbs off of the bottom, we call that limbing it up. So sometimes you can limb up, you would limb up deciduous trees, maybe if they were overhanging a walkway. But with evergreens, you don't want to limb them up because they like to have those broad branches at the bottom to ensure that structural integrity.
Okay. Another question was, I have 3 overgrown boxwoods that have grown into each other. They are too big for their space. Will they survive being cut back significantly? If so, what time of the year do you suggest?
So with boxwoods, especially if there are a few that have grown together like that, I would do that thinning that I talked about, where you find kind of like get into the bush a little bit, find some of the oldest branches and cut them back down to the ground. Not all of them, but maybe about a third of the oldest, biggest branches, take them back, significantly, let them thin out a little bit. Then as they might look a little haggardly in the first year after you do it, but they will come back and get that dense foliage on the outside again. But I would use more of a thinning process. And with boxwoods, oh golly, what did I say? This is why I write stuff down. You want to shape them in early spring, and I would do, because they're flowering, I would do pretty much everything, thinning or shaping in spring.
Okay. And another question was, if you trim back more than a third, will the remaining limb die?
It depends on what species it is.
Okay.
It depends on what species it is. So if you cut back a third of a pine tree, then that branch is done for, because it doesn't have any side buds that will then produce growth. When I say a third of the canopy, I'm saying a third of the whole tree or a third of the whole shrub. You never want to take out or prune out any more than a third of a shrub or tree at any time. It's just too much stress on the tree. You also have to think about, even with smaller plants, if you prune back the shoots, you should be pruning back the roots. Well, you're not going to pull up a tree or shrub to do that. So you just that's the rule of thumb, is don't take it back more than a third. But, if it's like I said, a pine tree, the rest of that branch would die. If it were a yew, no, you'd probably be fine if you took out half of it. Might not be the healthiest choice, but you could thin it out a little bit.
And one last one here before we kind of go into our Master Gardener presentation. Should you remove dead lower branches of a Norway spruce?
It's always okay to remove dead from any species at any time, because essentially dead material on that tree or plant of whatever type is just stealing nutrients from the rest of the plant. No, it's not great to remove the bottom branches, but if they're dead, they're not doing anything great anyways. Yeah, it can kind of help keep that structural integrity. You just want to make sure you take them off correctly. As I showed the little diagram there, where to make those cuts. What that tree is trying to tell you is it may not like where it is. And you may not have been the one that planted it. Yeah, I realize that a lot of homeowners kind of inherit these plants and the problems that are associated with them.
We would like to kind of share also our Master Gardeners. We have two Master Gardeners that helped with our swag presentation. One of them was Teresa Brookman, and she's been a Master Gardener since 1993. So for 27 years experience. And Pat Guerin, this is her second year as a Master Gardener.
Good morning. I'm Teresa Brookman, Master Gardener from Jefferson County, Unit 23. And hopefully we're going to show you how to make a swag this morning. I've gathered materials just from my property, and I'm sure many of you have other types of evergreens that you can use. I swiped from my neighbor's cedar tree, some cedar, and we have some, I guess it's just longleaf pine, and I have a lot of boxwood that we've cut, and I have a little holly tree out here that we've cut some holly off of. So we're going to try to show you how to make a swag. And I started out with just a piece of the pine to use as a base. Then I added some of the cedar to help close in the base and make it thicker looking. Then I added some of my boxwood. Another piece. And then I found one cedar that happened to have some pretty, made my mock-up here and it's all sticking together. Red berries, or blueberries, I'm sorry, colorblind. And I put a piece of my holly tree in it. add some more green. Let's see. I need the pine needs to be up a little closer. And then I added a few little sprigs of the shorter pieces of pine up here at the top just to kind of fill in and make it a little bit fuller. I've lost them off that pieces here. Okay, then I take and just use plain old green cattle wire and just wrap it very tightly. Try not to catch your glove in there. I wear the gloves to keep the sap from the evergreens off of your hands. I found out last night that was difficult to wash off. And I just use some little wire cutters. And there should be the piece you started with, but if you didn't, it'll work. And then I use my big pruners, and I have lost my big pruners. What are you looking for? My big pruners. There, my assistant found them, thank you. And then I just prune the pieces close to make it look pleasing at the top. Try to flush cut them. You have arthritis in your hands, that's sometimes the most difficult part. Okay. Now at this time, you can still play around with it. You can add, I have some already strung together some things to add, a pine cone and some freeze-dried orange slices if you're lucky enough to have a dehydrator, or you can buy these. This is all things that I found on my property. And add another pine cone. And then you can wire those on to make sure they don't come off. Also helps make the first things a little more secure. And then just add a bow to it. And very quickly, just from things on your own property, you came up with a swag. You pruned your bushes a little bit. And then you can make just a hanger out of some bigger wire to put up on the top and hang it. I've got some aluminum craft wire that I use to make my hangers with. It's some that I use when I make jewelry, so I got plenty of that. And it's a nice green color to add to the Christmas festivities. And then if you're lucky to have some lattice, you can hang it and fool around with it a little bit more.
Good morning. My name is Pat Guerin, and I'm also a master gardener from Jefferson County. And we've had a lot of fun today making these swags for you viewers at home. I want to start out by saying that there's no right way and wrong way to do this. There's your way. So when you get finished, if you love your swag, you hang it up and enjoy it. All right. What I did a little different than Teresa was I built my swag on a base, and it's a coat hanger. It's just a regular old coat hanger, and you just grab the top and you grab the crossbar and you pull it apart, and you can make it as skinny as you want or as wide as you want, and you have a base to wire your greenery on. That's the way I do it. That's certainly not the only way, because I've got jillions of coat hangers in the closet. This is already wired together. Basically, I used the cedar that Teresa took from her neighbor's yard, or she borrowed it. Okay, then these are pine cones, 3 pine cones that Christina got from her mom's yard. This ribbon was purchased on sale. This silver cording was purchased in a great big roll at a rummage sale, I believe Teresa said. So you can find materials for your swags anywhere. You know, I shop year round for things that I can use at Christmas time. So that's why this swag will hang on a hanger, and it's easier for me to work with it hanging, and I like the base, but that's entirely up to you. When you start, you need to have a pair of scissors, and this cannot be your fabric scissors. It needs to be the scissors that you threw away 2 or 3 years ago when you went and got out of the trash, and now you can cut wire with them, or you can actually borrow wire cutters from your husband, or you can go to Hobby Lobby and use a 40% off coupon and buy your own wire cutters, and that way you know where they are and you don't have to look for them. The other things that you probably will have to have are some Ziploc ties. They come in all different colors, but since we're working with Christmas colors, probably green or black would show less. Also, there's lots of different kinds of wire. There's floral wire, the long kind. You can cut it in pieces, or you can get the floral wire that's on a ring, and you can just unwrap it and cut off what you need. So either one of those. These are also things that were purchased on sale after Christmas last year. You know, any kind of bling or glitz, if you like that style, when they put them on sale, just put them in your cart and you use them next year. The other thing, there are pine cones. They're free for the asking. There's different shapes of pine cones. On this wreath, I use the long, narrower ones, but they're also pine cones that are shorter and more full. So it doesn't matter, you know, if you don't have one kind of pine cone and you've got another, then use it. Okay, I want to show you that. The other thing I think Teresa mentioned were the dehydrated orange slices. These were oranges that put in a dehydrator, and they make really nice embellishments for the natural, rustic looking swags. These bells were purchased, I think, at like Dollar Tree or Dollar General, maybe after Christmas. I don't know. I didn't buy them, but you know, stuff like that, get it while it's on sale and then store it away, and you'll have it next Christmas when you're working with your projects. Just another couple of ornaments. You know, you can build the ornaments in your swag if you like that look. I picked out, these were a couple of rolls of ribbon that Christina had, and I chose them to show you if you want an all natural look, and you don't want red and green. You want with a natural rustic look. You could use those two kinds of ribbon. They would go very well together. Make a double bow, you know, and use the pine cones and the orange, and you would have a really nice monochromatic swag with your greenery in the background. I just wanted to show you that as an option. Okay, the other thing that I picked out of Christina's go-to box, I noticed that she had several Victorian looking ribbon. Sorry about that. And I don't know, these all have sale price tags on them. But if you want a Victorian look at those beautiful roses with the gold glitter and that really pretty pink. Here's some more pink. You could put all those together with some, you know, and come up with a totally different look if you like Victorian colors for Christmas. I just wanted to show you those things. This is what I come up with, and you know, there's no right or wrong. It's your swag.